You know, when I think back on my career, I ask myself, what was my experience of being in a collective? This was no big deal for me because I started life as a musician. And musicians are collective beasts. Even pianists playing Chopin etudes are collective beasts in a way, in terms of imagining that there's an audience there. So I thought a lot about that when I made this terrible transition into sociology. And so one of the things that, when I moved away from performing as a musician, I asked myself was, is there anything about what I knew as a performing musician that would transfer over into the experiences of collective life in society? So what is that transfer? Well, I think one of the things about it is the enormously complicated and not at all spontaneous way of dealing with assertion and deference. And I'll explain to you what that means. Well, I think I have an idea. No, let me explain. Do you think by this time, basically, people have gotten to this completely stage? In social relations, we can also break the pattern of deference that makes everything go smooth, which makes people feel secure by suddenly asserting. What do you mean? I mean that it breaks down the idea of a division of labor, which is clear-cut. And when you're in a collective and you're dealing with this dynamic between assertion and deference, when you stop deferring, you break down the notion that there is this division of labor. You're doing something disruptive. Just the way a cellist can disrupt the notion of rhythm that's a kind of secure foundation. It's something that all forms of collective performance have, which is this uncertain relation between deference, ceding to the others, supporting them, and assertion, which breaks that mold. So if that's true, that there's this interplay between deference and assertion, what's the role of solidarity? For instance, do you think that solidarity is something that is a question of repression, of social control? Aha, I'm very glad you asked me that question. The thing about solidarity is if you're all on the same page, that's very coercive. There's no room for differentiation, for complexity. Everybody is reading, as we say in English, from the same hymnal. And in my writings about this, I have I've opposed cooperation, which gets people who are very different, who don't feel much solidarity with each other, to work together. Opposed to solidarity, in which purposes are clear, the methods are clear, everybody knows what to do. That's a form of oppression. And it's why, thinking about this in political terms, that the social left, my kind of leftist, has always seen themselves antithetical to the political left. Because the political left is all about solidarity. here's what we believe, here's our program. And the social left is, okay, here's a problem, and we've got to get, say, Muslims and Christians and Jews to work together on it, like living together in the Lower East Side in New York, where we are now. It's a big issue. We can't just say, you will all agree on the following things and follow that, and then solidarity. It has to be a much more complex and multi-layered process. So how would you bring that back into the arts? We always think that a well-disciplined performance is a good performance. And my own experience as a musician, both in classical music and then doing this sound stuff that I did for Merce, was that that a really well-disciplined performance squeezes the life out of something. There's always an edge of risk where people aren't quite on the same page, or indeed don't want to be on the same page, but know they have to get the performance done together, which brings performance to life. You're on the edge. It's, if you wanted to talk philosophical terms, it's liminal. There's a limit. You're getting close to that limit where things might fall apart. So tell me something. What's the role of ritual in cooperation? And what's the relation between ritual, cooperation, and community? I think one of the extraordinary errors that people make in thinking about cooperation is that it always translates into verbal form, whereas nonverbal communication is really the domain of rehearsing, and more generally, I would think of ritual. At least it is to me. What can't be said is a way of the rituals in that help us shape a performance and make the performance more dynamic. That is, we have certain rituals of communicating, physically, bodily. I say this to you because in social life, we're often making this translation of ritual from the physical to the verbal, and we do it wrongly to do that. Think about the mask that people wear in a tribal dance, or the taking communion with the wafer and the wine in a religious thing. The meaning of those things is in the gesture, not in the symbolization. You could say the mask represents death. That's a verbalization, that's a verbal sequence in Wittgenstein's term. But the person wearing the mask doesn't think, I'm representing death. They think, I'm wearing a mask. The person taking the wine and wafer doesn't think, I'm having a little munch on Christ's forearm and having a little sip, vampire-like, of Christ's blood. It's that the wine and the wafer have entered into a gesture which is something which exists on its own, in its own. So anyhow, my view of what constitutes a community is not based on words.